Last time on the Skip and Josh podcast.
And that's the list.
Please thank her for her list.
I will.
We love
Good
when
list.
our listeners get involved with the show, although she doesn't listen to our show.
No, she doesn't.
You're listening to the Skip and Josh podcast with Skip Sherman and Josh Obadia.
Okay, Skip, so today we're going to count down not our favorite, but our least favorite stats, sports stats. So I'm very excited about this list. But before we get to it, speaking of stats, it's somewhat related to stats. You know how I feel about all these publications, whether they're online or not, that publish their power rankings.
Oh, power rankings. Actually, it's funny. I didn't think of power rankings. It could be number one on my worst list, but it's not really a stat, right?
Right. It's not really a stat, so it's not in my list, but
Yeah.
I have a story about power rankings.
Oh,
So the Buffalo News newspaper, they
Yeah.
recently, this week, they published their NHL power rankings. And it's the whole league. It's not just one division. So it's all the
Sure.
teams.
okay.
I mean, I don't think you're going to be surprised to hear that, the Buffalo Sabres were last on the power rankings.
Well, they are by far the worst team in the league. No?
Right. But what I think you will be surprised to hear is that one of the teams ahead of the Buffalo Sabres was the Seattle Kraken.
So the Buffalo, that's clever. Come on. You have to give the Buffalo News some credit there.
I do.
They're actually, the team that doesn't even exist yet is already better than the Sabres.
Right, because whoever they get in the expansion draft, they're automatically going to be better than the Sabres.
They are. It's unreal. I mean, I don't want to get into too much of an NHL show, but man, in the preseason, so many people were predicting the Sabres to be like a breakthrough team. No?
Right, because they made all these acquisitions in the offseason.
Or to be somewhat competitive at least. But it's really like it's hard to. I mean, I'd really, really hate to be a Sabres fan. Like it must be awful right now.
I actually know a few Sabres fans because Buffalo is very close to Toronto, so.
Yeah, like your buddy Joe, right? He must have he works for the Sabres, no?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So he's obligated to be a fan.
Tough times in Buffalo.
Did you have any listener mail from our last episode?
Mailbag.
I do. I have tons. And the first one, before I get into all the rest of the listener mail, the first one we got this week is that we got our friend of the show, Neil, here in Montreal, who's been a guest, or probably our most frequent guest when we did guests.
Mm-hmm.
He tweeted about our 1980s movie episode saying, "Remember when you guys used to preview March Madness? Those were the days."
Yes, that's right. We did it. We did sort of a preview. We talked about it for about 7 seconds. So,
So, I mean, he's probably jonesing for a guest spot and probably wanted to preview the March Madness, but this is a weird March Madness for me, Josh. I did not watch 1 second of college basketball the last 2 days. Not 1 second.
So that's very interesting because last time we spoke, I told you how I wasn't really into it. However, on Thursday night when they had those 4 play-in games, all of a sudden I was so into it. Like I watched the games, and then yesterday I watched all the games, and today, as soon as we're done recording, I'm going to go watch all the games, and I'm so into it all of a sudden.
It's amazing. Actually, I should probably watch it. I should probably try to watch, but it's very interesting that it's probably much more, I don't want to use the word pure, but like you're watching for the right reasons, I should say, as a sports fan, like you don't have a rooting interest for the team. I mean, yes, you filled out brackets, but that's not your prime focus. The brackets are just for fun, like you're not constantly looking at your bracket to see how you're doing. You're watching the games for the sake of the sport and watching the games, right? So listener mail, I do have much, much more. Epic listener mail. I want to thank all our listeners and just people who follow us on Facebook and Twitter and all the socials. So I'm going to just go back 2 weeks, Josh, to the lyrics episode. Favorite lyrics.
We had some mail trickled in late.
Yeah. Friend of the show, Jason, wrote on our Facebook saying, "This was another good podcast. To further the trend of werewolves in London, I love the line, 'You better stay away from him. He'll rip your lungs out, Jim. I'd like to meet his tailor.'"
I was considering mentioning that line because it is fantastic.
He continues by saying, "What can a werewolf possibly be wearing that you'd want to meet his tailor? Brilliant."
Well, you never know. He could be better dressed than you or I.
I think that's probably where it's going, but that's the kind of song where you just can't you can't try to decipher what he's trying to say.
So many people have commented on that song. I mean, maybe we should have had it as number 1.
Yeah, maybe, actually. There was also another email that we got actually from your brother about the lyrics episode, and he mentioned that he had a recollection. I don't remember ever telling him this story about how he was saying how American Pie, the song by Don McLean, has some of the best lyrics. He said he thought I had done an essay on it in school, and he's not far off. We actually spent a week in English class in grade 11 doing Don McLean's American Pie sort of as a poem. Deciphering it all, and it was honestly like the best week of English I ever had in high school.
That's almost as good as your son's teacher who's doing The Princess Bride.
It's actually sort of the same thing. I should have thought of that when we talked about The Princess Bride last week. So like I was saying before, I texted you, Josh, epic response to the 1980s movie list.
Mm-hmm. First episode that your wife has ever listened to, by the way.
First episode that she ever listened to, and she actually really loved it. She I think, I don't know if she'll ever listen again, but she really enjoyed that episode. Good friend of the show, Jesse, out in Dallas, Texas, gave us his list. And it's interesting because I'm going to read you some movies now, because last time you said there's for sure movies that we missed, right?
Right.
So you're about to find out which ones they were, because our listeners obviously are keyed into this topic, right?
Of course.
So Wrath of Khan, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, The Princess Bride, Field of Dreams, Die Hard, The Empire Strikes Back, and Can't Buy Me Love. Have you ever seen Can't Buy Me Love?
I think I have. I didn't realize that was so old, though.
Yeah. And then another email from your brother with his favorite movies, and he has a different list, completely different than ours.
It was very surprising, his list.
Working Girl, Tootsie, Big, When Harry Met Sally, Broadcast News, Amadeus, and then another movie that I should have considered, which is Fast Times at Ridgemount High. That one, that's a solid list. Although Amadeus, I never really cared for that. So
it's funny. Some of those, if you had asked me, I would have said they're from the 70s. Like, they just seem so old to me.
Tootsie and Working Girl are more early 80s, like for us. Yeah. Jeff from here in the West Island of Montreal gave us only his top 5. So Untouchables, Field of Dreams, Lethal Weapon, Airplane, and Spaceballs. Now, Spaceballs is going to become a recurring theme, as you're going to see. It seems to be one that we forgot because another friend of the show, Danny, who lives out in Montreal here, also said Spaceballs. He replied on Facebook with 3 GIFs about Spaceballs. Mm-hmm. My sister, Stephanie, here in Montreal, Dead Poet Society, Heathers, Return of the Jedi, Scarface, Stand By Me, Top Gun, and Some Kind of Wonderful. That's a solid list because Dead Poet Society is really good. Heathers is a movie that I forgot about. And Some Kind of Wonderful is actually, it's actually one of those John Hughes movies. So according to my wife, it's combined with the others. So Mark, our good friend out in Philadelphia, wrote to us saying might have been one of the best episodes. I agree with most of them. Princess Bride, Field of Dreams, Die Hard, Breakfast Club. And he said using the same approach as the podcast, meaning all the John Hughes movies could be combined into one on your list. Top Gun, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And then he said, what about Spaceballs? So there's another one with Spaceballs. Howard out here in the West Island said Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, which is a good shout for that movie. Jeff, different Jeff. This is Jeff in California. He said it's hard to pick only 7, but Trading Places, Scarface, Aliens, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Risky Business, Die Hard, and The Princess Bride. So a lot of similarities. Scarface is the one that came up on a couple of people's lists. And then and that's it. That's the listener mail.
Great, I love it.
I love getting responses and interaction. When we have a topic, it's fun. So
it is. It's great. And now, actually, we should just let our listeners do all our research for us. Therefore, less work for us.
Yeah, but the theme is that the ones that we got a lot of responses on are like the 80s stuff, like what's your favorite song? What's your favorite album? Like we're about to do this really obscure list, which is our least favorite or worst sports statistics. Now this is like really like nerd sports stuff, if you ask me. But this is our wheelhouse. I am a sports nerd, so this is where this is what I am most comfortable talking about. I actually just wrote the list. I have a list. I have some honorable mentions, but I didn't do any research because I'm completely prepared to talk about my 7 things without really doing any research. Just wrote them down and I'm ready to talk about them.
Yeah, actually, I think I finished my list right after we hung up last week, and I finished it in about 15 minutes.
Right. But I wanted to like get some stats to show why it's stupid. Like you're going to see like some trends over the years, how things have changed. And I was like, no, I can talk about this. Like I don't need to look this stuff up.
Same with me. I didn't do any research. So,
do you have honorable mentions, Josh?
No honorable mentions. I have 7 and I'm ready to go whenever you are.
I'll just give you like some honorable mentions. So I asked my son, and the first thing that came to his mind was QBR, like ESPN's or the NFL's like quarterback rating system.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't feel it was sort of fair because, I mean, you do need some way to rate the quarterbacks, and this is what we've got. I mean, it might not be a perfect stat, but it does represent something that tells you how good a quarterback is.
Except that the fact that ESPN has one version and the NFL has a different version, that right there, that tells you that there's a problem because there should only be one.
That's so true. I had wins for pitchers in baseball on my honorable mentions, and you'll see why it's not in my top 7. In soccer, time of possession is literally the dumbest thing because half the time, there's so many times where the teams that have less time of possession still win. I have written down any stat in golf. So
that's great.
So, I mean, we don't watch a lot of golf. Anybody who's listened before knows we're not golf fans. But like you hear about these stats like greens in play and drive distance. Like they try to come up with golf really tried to become like really statistical, like really like next gen, and it's dumb. It's just dumb.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. This reminds me when we were in university, do you remember you invented a stat?
What was it?
So you're going to know right away when I mention it. So we went to play pool a few times, and sometimes we would have to use what we call, it's called the bridge, but I call it the rake. And then you used to say that I was like an 80% shooter with the bridge.
Right.
When I use the bridge.
We'd keep track. If you pull out that bridge, like you're right, we used to call it the rake. If you pull out the rake, I was like, oh, Josh, he's 6 for the last 7 with the rake.
No one else knows that stat, just you and I.
I just forgot. I didn't know about it till just now. I completely blocked it out of my memory. And then the other thing I have my honorable mention, and this is just a general comment about sports stats. Anytime an announcer says, this is the first time that X team has beat Y team in this circumstance since 1970 something. Those are the dumbest things ever.
I agree.
As a matter of fact, I saw on Twitter, someone said that one of the announcers in the March Madness games yesterday were saying something like, this is Baylor's first time in the NCAA tournament since 2019. 2019 was the last tournament.
Right. Or there's a team that won their game. I think it was Drake, actually. They won their play-in game. So it was like their first tournament win in like 20 years, or I don't know how long, maybe even longer.
Right.
But that's because, I mean, it's completely different players every year. What are you going to do?
I know. It's like, I mean, yeah, it tells you the history of the school and maybe, how good their program has been, within their league. But, really, it doesn't tell you that much about this version of Drake's team. By the way, I never knew that Drake had a team, the rapper. Like, it's amazing that he has a team.
Oh, you see, everyone's using that joke, but I thought it was the Drake from Seinfeld.
I don't even like Drake.
You don't like the Drake?
I hate the Drake.
I love the Drake.
How could you not like the Drake?
Who's the Drake?
Who's the Drake?
The Drake is good.
Oh.
That's great. That's great. So, my category, Josh, that means I go first, right?
Sure, go ahead.
Number 7.
So, I'm stealing this from you, and this is this was my inspiration for the topic, and that's power play goals in hockey. Now, it's bad because the announcers are emphasizing that this player scored this many power play goals, which in fact, it's easier to score. Like the stat that should be more important should be how many 5-on-5 goals does this player have, not how many power play goals did this player have. But it's only number 7 on the list because it does actually have a purpose, and it does help measure a player's value because power plays are important and games can be won and lost on the power play. So when they show Alexander Ovechkin and they show you that he had the most power play goals in the league last year, well, that tells you that, well, you better not take any penalties when you're playing against the Capitals, right? Because Ovechkin's going to score on you, you know? So, I mean, there is that. So while it is kind of weird that there's such an emphasis on power play points and power play goals, it's not completely useless.
Okay. So number 7 for me is penalty minutes in hockey. And so the reason I've put this on my list is because it seems like anytime an announcer or a newspaper or a website mentions, you know, this guy had 80 penalty minutes last season or whatever, it seems like it's glorified. Like, oh, this is a good thing. He had 80 penalty minutes or he had 100 penalty minutes. But actually, penalty minutes are actually a bad thing because you're hurting your team by being in the penalty box. So I don't know why it's glorified.
Right. It's glorified because they want to show like, this guy's a real tough guy, you know, Rob Brown had 308 penalty minutes one year or whatever it was, you know, like he's the toughest guy in the league. You don't mess with him. But like, he's also, you know, like put his team in a lot of bad situations, you know?
Right.
Right. That's a good one. I like that. I enjoy that.
Number 6.
So number 6 for me, I toyed on this one. I may be leaving it off the list because the thing is there's many obscure stats that you could say are useless, but to make the list, it has to be a stat that is at least referenced fairly often. So, well, yeah, but this stat is not referenced that often, but I still put it on the list because it is useless. And that's fielding percentage in baseball. Like when they talk about like this guy, his fielding percentage basically is like the percentage of chances you made, you know, without making an error, you know?
Right.
So, I mean, this is the dumbest stat. And I used to remember seeing this because they would say like, they would show you like a shortstop who had like a 995 fielding percentage. But the problem is he couldn't get to any balls, right? He'd only field the balls hit right at him. And meanwhile, you have a guy like Ozzie Smith who's ranging 80 feet to his left and 80 feet to his right and throwing off under his legs and making all these acrobatic plays, you know, who maybe have a less of a fielding percentage than that guy. And then I remember this specifically. I mean, fielding percentage for outfielders is actually the worst. That's a no-brainer. But I remember watching when I was like a younger kid, maybe 10, 12 years old. And do you remember this show? Like, it was a baseball sort of like challenge. It was like Battle Network Stars, but baseball. You know, like I don't even remember what it was, but it was like a baseball challenge where they used to see like they would throw the batters and they used to have to hit to all fields and who could hit the most home runs, who could throw from the outfield and hit the targets. You know, it was like a sort of obstacle course for baseball players. And they used to hit these balls out in the outfield and the outfielders used to have to run and catch them. And I remember seeing Fred Lynn, who I don't want to disparage Fred Lynn. He was really quite a good defensive center fielder, but he wasn't the fastest player. And Fred Lynn made like 2 diving catches during this challenge, right?
Okay.
And I remember thinking, man, this guy's amazing. Then meanwhile, they hit balls to Ricky Henderson, and Ricky Henderson just glides under them and catches them.
Because he's faster.
Because he's faster, right? So right then and there, it's 12-year-olds realized like, well, no, this is not right, you know? So, I mean, that's why fielding percentage in baseball is the worst, because if the ball goes over your head, you don't get an error, but you didn't make a play either, you know? So.
Right. I like that one. That's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so number 6 for me, it's shots on goal in hockey. And so it's not necessarily for a specific player, but what bothers me is when, you know, like it's, let's say the second intermission and Montreal's down by like 3 goals, but they've been out shooting their opponent like 30-10. So the announcers will say, well, you know, Montreal, they're out shooting Calgary 30-10. But that just goes to show you that it doesn't matter if you're out shooting your opponent 30-10 because you're losing 3-0. So it's such an overrated stat. Yes, you obviously need to take shots or else you're not going to score. But it doesn't necessarily mean that if you have more shots than your opponent, that you're going to win.
Right. NHL analysts and telecasts are getting better with that because now they're really showing us shots from the slot or from the danger areas. They've gotten better because they realize that, you know, and I'm glad you used the Canadians as an example because they're the classic example because last year they would continuously outshoot their opponents, but when every shot is coming from the outside or just from the point, and the goalie just, it's like practice for him.
But we talking about practice, man. What are we talking about? Practice?
If it hits his logo in the middle of his chest, it's not that hard to make a save.
What you really need is the high danger chance, is what they call them.
Number 5.
Number 5, Josh, for me. I don't know how you're going to feel about this one.
Okay.
Well, I know you're going to feel good about it. This is field goal percentage in the NBA, and it also goes to shooting percentage in the NHL. But they don't really show us shooting percentage in the NHL anymore, right?
Right.
But field goal percentage in the NBA. I remember, like, when I first started following the NBA, I would see like the field goal percentage leaders, and it'd be like, well, Shaquille O'Neal's hitting like 65% of his shots, And
that's because all his shots are right under the basket.
Yeah, they're all dunks. And meanwhile, like, Michael Jordan's only shooting 49%, right? So, I mean, they keep showing that stat. Like, they always like to show us field goal percentage. And I agree it is important because it can be an important barometer for a player because, sometimes a player will score 30 points in a game. But if they take 30 shots, obviously he did not have a good game. So the field goal percentage is important there. But I just never liked the stat because it's so important to understand the role of the player. Like, if you don't know the role of the player that you're looking at, the stat is completely misleading, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and especially nowadays because there's so many 3-point shots. So you better be able to hit your threes if you're going to have your overall field goal percentage anywhere near 50%.
Okay, so number 5 for me is the second assist in hockey. So,
but I like that. No?
You like it?
Well, I mean, yeah.
So here's my problem with the second assist. Sometimes the second assist is actually a legitimate play that is vital for the goal. But there are a lot of times where I think they just give out a second assist for the sake of giving it out. And the player, I mean, he may have touched it. It may have glanced off his skate. Who knows? But does he really deserve that assist? And that's why you see, like, most players have more assists than goals because there's double the amount of assists handed out every season.
Yeah. And actually, the second assist really became a much bigger thing in the 80s in the Gretzky era. And people used to complain that Gretzky used to get all those second assists, But you're right. Not every assist is created equal. Sometimes that second assist is actually more important than the first assist.
Sometimes,
right?
yes.
If the guy, a defenseman makes a great play to get it out of the zone, passes it up to the forward, who then passes it to the scorer, right? Obviously, that first pass is actually more important. But yeah, you're right. There's so many that are just completely useless. The goalie could just pass it to the defenseman behind the net. Then the defenseman shoots a 50-foot stretch pass and sends someone on a breakaway. The goalie gets an assist too, right? That's a good one, Josh. That's a good one. I didn't think of that. And it's amazing that so far we really haven't had any of the same.
Right.
Number 4.
Number 4 for me is a topic and a stat that I've talked about often, and that's in the NFL passing yards. Now, that sounds weird, right?
No, I think I know where you're going with this.
Because when you're just looking at a quarterback and you're saying he threw for this many yards in a game, or he threw for this many yards in a season, when it's a big number, he threw for 4,000 yards this year. Oh, he threw for 300 yards in a game, it's lost its meaning to me because almost every half the league throws for 4,000 yards. And when in the 80s, if you had 2 quarterbacks in the league that threw for 4,000 yards, that was a big deal,
Right.
The league is so pass oriented that the amount of yards that gets bandied about is like, it's nuts. Like 2 years ago, Jameis Winston threw for 5,000 yards,
and how many interceptions did he throw?
Well, a lot, but like 30, I don't know. But like up until recent history, there's only the amount of quarterbacks that have ever thrown for 5,000 yards. I could be completely wrong. It's a very small list. It's like Dan Marino, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, that's the list.
Right.
Maybe Peyton Manning. I don't know. But like 5,000 yards in a season is unheard of. And Jameis Winston sucks. Right. So I just would love to have quarterbacks. And as I mentioned, QBR, maybe that's our best way. But like using yards as a barometer for how good a quarterback is no good. And you're going to see with my next thing it's going to continue along the lines of this topic.
Okay. I like that one.
Mm.
So number 4 for me is, you mentioned it already, power play goals in hockey. And you pretty much said everything that I was going to say because, again, the announcers seem to glorify power play goals. Like, he scored 3 goals, 2 of them were on the power play, which is fine. I mean, you want to tell me, you can tell me. But again, as you said, it's easier to score on the power play. So that's not a big deal. For me, what they should say is, he scored 3 goals, 2 of them were at even strength. That's what they should say. They should emphasize the even strength goals, not the power play goals.
Right. I think this is something that will take a big change in the way broadcasters look at things and teams look at things to, if ever we're going to get to where they're saying that, because I don't feel we're even close. No one's ever considered talking about that.
No, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm not holding my breath.
Number 3.
So number 3 for me, I'm combining sports here, hockey and football.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's the same theme, and that's wins for the quarterback and wins for the goalie.
Okay.
Now, you notice that in my honorable mentions, I mentioned wins for the pitchers, because that I feel that wins for pitchers in baseball, the pitcher in baseball affects the game much, much more than the quarterback or the goalie. So, I mean, the pitcher is involved in every single play of the game, and he directly affects what the batter does, right? So I feel that the pitcher, when you look at how many wins or how often a team wins when a pitcher pitches, is more relevant. But football, I mean, football is the ultimate team sport. There's 11 guys on offense,
Yeah.
and 11 guys on defense, and
12
all
in
those
the
11
CFL.
guys on offense have, like, what is Bill Belichick's favorite saying? Do your job, right? All 11 of those guys have to do their job, and there was never anything so clear about this than in the Super Bowl, because who's the best quarterback in the NFL? Pat Mahomes. I'm gonna answer for you.
Yeah, Pat Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Let's say I mean, Pat Mahomes, by any means of, you can survey 1 million fans, and Pat Mahomes is going to be your 1 or 2 in the league.
Right.
And what happened in the Super Bowl?
He lost.
Now, is it because Pat Mahomes is bad?
No.
It's because no one could block for him. So he didn't have any time. So all those 11 guys in the field all have to work in unison for every single play to succeed. Now, obviously, the quarterback is more important than all those other 10 guys that he's with. But still, to say that a quarterback has a win, he's the win. That's like, what about all those guys on defense? You know?
Right. You never hear, like, a defensive lineman, what was his 1-loss record? You never hear that.
I mean, Tom Brady, he's considered, he got the win for winning the Super Bowl a few years ago against the Seahawks. Because why? Because because on one of the final plays of the game, Russell Wilson threw an interception in the end zone.
Right. Malcolm Butler
Right?
should have got the win.
Exactly. All that to say is that I don't feel it's fair that the quarterbacks get singled out for the win. And in hockey, it's the same, because the goalies get the wins and losses. But just like you said before, the shots that the goalies face can be completely different from game to game, right? If you're being held, if you're hung out to dry by your defense, you're going to get a loss because you had to face 5 breakaways and 3 2-on-1s. Like that's not your fault, you know? There's only so much the goalie can do. And actually, if you talk to most, I forget where I heard this, or maybe I read it. Almost the goalies in the NHL now are almost all the same.
Yeah, there isn't much difference. I agree. You don't need to have the best goalie in the league to win the cup.
But it's not just that. They all play the same style. They're all relatively the same size. Like, bigger goalies are the thing, right? And they all play the same style, which is come out, cut off the angles, get into the butterfly, cover as much of the net as you can on every play, right? So it's very hard to pin. I mean, obviously goalies make bad plays, but for the most part, when a goal is scored, it's not the goalie's fault, you know?
Right. No, I do like this one.
Yeah.
So
Good, I'm glad.
number 3 for me is, and I'm going to clarify this, it's average rushing yards per carry for a running back in a game. And the reason I've had this on my list,
I love it. It's so good because I have a perfect example.
The reason I have this on my list is because, a running back, let's say, and this has happened 100 times. At the end of the game, you look at the stats, the running back had 100 rushing yards, and he may have had 10 carries. So his average yards per carry is 10, which sounds great. Except what you don't know is he had one carry for 90 yards, and the rest of the game he had 10 yards. So it's such a deceiving stat.
Now, Detroit Lions fans and Barry Sanders fans are going to get mad at me, but that is the story of Barry Sanders' career. And I don't want to take anything against the guy, because you do need a home run hitter, as they say in football. Like a guy who's going to, every time he touches the ball, you don't know if he could break it for a touchdown. That's extremely important. And Barry Sanders was amazing. But there's so many games when you'd watch the Lions play where Barry Sanders had exactly the stat line that you said. 1 yard loss, 2 yard loss, 2 yard gain, 3 yard gain, 70-yard touchdown. That was Barry Sanders. That was Barry Sanders. 100%.
And then at the end of the game, his average yards per carry looks great.
Yeah. What they need to have is not the average, but the problem is they can't dumb it down for the fans because the fans can't understand math, is they need the mean rushing yards.
Exactly. Right? The mean is more telling, obviously.
Yeah, but try explaining to most NFL fans what mean is, and they're gonna get a lot of blank stares.
Right.
Number 2.
So am I at number 2?
You are.
I hope this is on your list.
I think I know your number 1, but go ahead.
I'm sure you know my number 1. I've ranted about it my whole life. But number 2 is in hockey, plus minus.
Okay. I thought you were going to say maybe plus minus in basketball, because now they're using that too.
The way they use it in basketball is good. It's correct. Because, so plus minus in hockey is when you're on the ice, when your team scores, you get a plus. If you're on the ice, when your team gets scored against, you get a minus. And there's exceptions for power plays and stuff like that.
Right.
But so it's supposed to show you, are you on the ice when more times when your team is scoring than when you're being scored against?
Right.
And for the most part, this is good. But the problem is, you know it as well as I do, if you've ever been in a hockey pool that uses plus minus, if you're on a good team, even the worst player has a good plus minus.
Right. I think Gretzky had once a plus 99 or something.
Yeah. You know who's leading the NHL right now in plus minus?
I don't actually.
It's Joel Edmondson of the Montreal Canadiens. Now, defensemen who log a lot of minutes have traditionally been at the top of the league in plus minus. I think the all-time leader for a season or maybe career is Larry Robinson or Bobby Orr, one of the other. And those are Hall of Fame players. Don't get me wrong. You know, they're completely Hall of Fame players. But plus minus is just not a gauge of like how good you are. You know, like you're just the defenseman laying back in your own zone doing nothing. Meanwhile, Wayne Gretzky is stick handling past 12 guys to score, and you get a plus.
Right. Or what happens if you just happened to step on the ice before the goal was scored? You had nothing to do with the goal, but you get a plus because you were on the ice.
Or even worse, a guy takes a shot from the point, it hits the goalie in the head and bounces over him and into the net, completely the goalie's fault, and you get a minus, right? So it is unfair, and I don't know, the problem with plus minus is, I don't know what it's supposed to show you. Like, I understand what wins for quarterback is trying to show you. I understand what passing yards, all these other stats that I've talked about and you've talked about, but I don't know what plus minus is really supposed to tell you.
I think it's supposed to tell you if you're a liability when you're on the ice. I
guess, but the problem is, if you're a bad team, look at the worst team. Look at the Buffalo Sabres. Every player's minus. Look at the Tampa Bay Lightning now. Every player's plus. So it doesn't tell you anything. You're on a good team. You're scoring a lot. You know.
Right. You're right. However, if there is within that team, within Tampa Bay, if there's one guy who's like plus 10 or 20, and there's another guy who's like at 0 or minus 1, then that tells you something because they're all on the same team. Yet this guy's a minus 1. Like, what's the problem?
The NBA is doing it's something similar, which is they call it plus minus, and it's like the point differential when you're on the court versus when you're not on the court, and it's much more telling because the 5 players on the court in the NBA, like the substitutions are not as frequent, right? Like you're constantly changing hockey, so like having that 5-man unit for an extended period of time means a little bit more, you know, because it's able to say, hey, you know, when this player's on the court, well, we really suck, you know? But when they bring in that guy off the bench, hey, we have all this, we're really good, you know? So I think it means a little bit more. Anyways, that's all I have to say about plus minus.
Okay. So number 2 for me, And this is I'm going to cheat here, just like your wife did. I'm grouping a bunch of stats into one.
Oh.
It's wins in baseball and in football and in hockey. All three of them in one.
You have the same ones that I had.
Right, except, so I have a little bit of a different take than you do. The quarterback stuff in football, it's exactly what you said, so I'm not going to repeat that. Now, in hockey, goalie wins. So similar to what you just said about plus minus, if you're on a good team and you're the goalie, you're going to have a lot of wins. If you're on a bad team, you're not going to have a lot of wins. So really, wins for a goalie in hockey are not indicative of you as a goalie. They're indicative of the team that you're on. Like, how many wins does the goalie for Buffalo have? Not that many. But how many wins does the goalie for Tampa Bay have? Much more. And so, Tampa Bay has a good goalie, but I wonder if you took Buffalo's goalie and Tampa's goalie and had them swap teams, you're going to see the Buffalo goalie playing on Tampa Bay is going to have a lot more wins.
Yeah, he's not going to be as bad as you think, right? And all of a sudden, Vasilevsky is going to be like, well, he's not going to look too good on Buffalo, right?
Right. Yeah. Here's another example from the 80s when the Oilers used to score 6 goals a game or more. Grant Fuhr had a ton of wins, even though he gave up like 5 goals every game.
No, the good thing about Grant Fuhr is he was able to. Scouts and people in hockey were able to look past his stats at a certain point because he was the goalie for Team Canada, right? In the 87 Canada Cup. And it was basically the hockey world knowing like, hey, this guy's really good. Forget about his stats because, he's all alone back there, Right.
Now, where I didn't agree with you, I'm grouping pitcher wins in baseball into this, and I'll tell you why. So you're right, because in hockey, usually you're using the same goalie every game. And in football, usually you're using the same quarterback every game. But in baseball, you're using a different pitcher every day. So it is a little bit different than those other sports. However, they have these archaic rules in baseball where if you're the starting pitcher, you can only get the win if you pitch at least 5 innings. However, if you're a relief pitcher and you come into the game in the 2nd inning and you only pitch 1 inning, you might get credit for the win. To me, that is completely backwards.
Right? If your team scored in that 1 inning that you pitched to take the lead, all of a sudden you get the win.
Exactly. There's also this rule where, there was one game I remember at the end of the season where the Boston Red Sox used 9 different pitchers, 1 every inning, and they won the game. Yeah. And the scorekeeper had to determine who he felt should get credit for the win. Now, just so happened, the pitcher that he decided happened to be on my fantasy team, and that allowed me to win my fantasy league because I got credit for a win. But that guy, my guy, did not pitch any better or worse than the other 8 guys who pitched in that game. So
I remember that game. He was completely arbitrary. He had to pick because there was no clear cut within the rules who should get the win, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that doesn't happen very often, though.
No, it doesn't. But still, the fact that rule exists. So
in baseball, I like better if they would show us, what is your team's record when you start as a starting pitcher? Not your 1-loss record according to the, did you pitch 6 innings and did they have the lead when you left? But like, what is the team's record in games where you started? That would be a better indication of how you're doing.
The other reason I don't like this stat in baseball is because oftentimes, you could pitch great and it just so happens that your team scored 0 runs that day for you and you're going to get the loss because you lost 1-0.
Yeah.
Now, by the same token, you could pitch lousy and your team happens to score 10 runs, so you get credit for the win even though you pitched lousy. So it's not a very, I don't look at wins when I'm determining, let's say I have to decide who I think should win the Cy Young. I don't look at wins at all.
What's your best stat for a pitcher? Like, is it whip? I think that's the,
well, there's 3 of them. There's whip, there's ERA, and there's also strikeouts.
Right. Okay.
Those are the 3 for me. Because I mean, if you're striking out a batter, that means the ball isn't put in play. That means there's less chance for a hit. There's less chance for an error. There's less chance for your team to make a mistake in the field.
Yeah.
So that's why strikeouts to me is important.
That's good. That makes sense. I mean, obviously, there's great pitchers that haven't been strikeout pitchers. I mean, look at Greg Maddux and these types. But in general, I think you're on the right track.
Number 1.
So number 1, Josh, for me, I think you know what it is.
I think we have the same number 1.
It's the save.
That's also my number 1.
So good. We can have a nice discussion about it.
And it's it's not even close. Like there's a huge gap between 1 and 2.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, to me, the save is one of the worst stats in history, and its existence has actually changed the way games are managed and played. It's created a position called the closer, which is completely dumb. It's completely. You have a position called the closer, which has been created to fuel this stat, so to speak. Right? Like when you look at all the save leaders, career save leaders, if you look at the list, they're all from the last 20 years.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, not all, but like more or less, right? And maybe the 90s, 80s, late 80s and up, and also like saves in a single season. I mean, those numbers are all recent. Like that's it's not even close, right? Because the save didn't exist before that. Managers used to deploy their pitchers based on who could get people out, not based on it's not the 9th inning. I can't bring him in now because it's the 8th inning now, so I can't bring in Mariano Rivera. I have to save him for the 9th. Like, what kind of nonsense is that?
So I agree with you 100%. The most frustrating thing for me is, like, it's one thing if your starting pitcher maybe could only go 5 or 6 innings, whatever, and then you need to use, 2 or 3 different relievers to close out the game. That's one thing. Or in the National League where you had to pinch hit for your pitcher because you needed some hits or some runs, and then you had no choice but to bring in another pitcher. That's fine. But what really bothers me, what really vexes me, is when
it vexes you.
It vexes me when you have this pitcher he's thrown 8 great innings. He's fine. Like, he could easily go out there and throw another inning. He's totally fine. He hasn't even broken a sweat, and like the team has a comfortable lead. But for some unknown reason, the manager decides, it's the 9th inning. I can't let my starter go back out there. I have to bring in my closer because it's the 9th inning. And that guy gets a save. When the starting pitcher could have just finished the game and no one would get a save. That's what really bothers me.
Look, I understand. And there is a value in your players as a manager, letting your players know what their role is, right? So I think that pitchers in a bullpen probably feel some comfort knowing, like, you're the 7th inning guy, you're the 8th inning guy, and you're the 9th inning guy. But the thing is, and that's fine. And if managers want to do that, I think it's a good formula. But the managers also have to have a brain in their head, because if you just say this guy's the 7th inning guy, this guy's the 8th inning guy, this guy's the 9th inning guy, you might as well go home and watch a movie if you're the manager. You don't even need to be there.
We talked about this during the World Series. Like, managers can now manage from their home just with a cell phone.
You don't need exactly. But what happens is, in the 8th inning, when you have a 1-run lead, the number 3, 4, and 5 batters on the opposing team are coming up. Those are the best players of the other team. And what do? You still put in your 8th inning guy, when in fact, you should put in your best pitcher, because you need to get these guys out. The 9th inning is going to be much, much easier. If you don't get these guys out, there isn't going to be a 9th inning.
There are like 1 or 2 managers who I saw this past season in the playoffs who did that. Like, it was the 8th inning and the other team had their best hitters coming up and they brought in their best pitcher in the 8th inning. And I was very happy to see that, but it's very rare when that happens.
But don't you find that only happens in the playoffs? In the regular season, they don't do that. In the playoffs, they're a little more aware of like, there's no tomorrow type of thing.
It's interesting. They do manage differently in the playoffs, which is another thing that frustrates me. But so you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So the save, I mean, I just can't, Josh.
Well, we haven't even mentioned, we need to give all the blame to Tony La Russa for this.
Well, he's definitely the father of the save. I mean, he started this with Bruce Sutter, actually, I don't know if he wasn't the manager though when they had Bruce Sutter, or maybe they had, what's his name was the manager?
Whitey Herzog?
Whitey, yeah.
Yeah, but then La Russa actually continued it when he went to Oakland with Eckersley, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Eckers, it started. I mean, we can say it's LaRussa, and that's our feeling, but someone started it, and no one ever put an end to it. That's the problem.
Right.
Yeah.
It's gotten worse, not better.
No, it's gotten way worse. It's not even close. No.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe we're turning the corner now. Like you said, some managers seems to be more aware. But the same managers who are more aware of not managing for the save, like, what's his name? The manager of Tampa, Kevin Cash.
Right.
Right? He's one of these guys that will put who he thinks is the best chance to get those guys out, regardless of the save situation or not, in the 7th inning or the 8th inning or whatever it is. But he's also the same manager that took out his starting pitcher when he was cruising after 6 innings and then ended up losing the World Series because of that.
By the way, I forgot to mention one of the dumbest things about the save. You can bring a guy in the 7th inning, and he pitches 7, 8, and 9 in a 15-0 game. He gets a save because he pitched 3 innings.
Yeah, 3 innings. If you pitch 3 and you finish the game, it's a save.
Right, even though they had a 15-run lead.
Yeah. I know. Like, the baseball's full of quirky stuff like that. But all that to say is, I hate the save. There's no turning back, though. We're stuck with it. I mean,
we are.
I mean, I can go on and on and on about the save. Like, what's our favorite team in history, Josh?
Montreal Expos.
What's your favorite year? Like, what's your favorite team of the Expos?
1994.
Okay. Who was the closer?
John Wetland.
Right. Who was the setup man?
Mel Rojas.
Okay. Who was the better pitcher?
Probably Mel Rojas.
Yeah. Mel Rojas had like a sub-2 ERA. He was like 1.9 or something. And thing with Mel Rojas is when he would come in, he had that split-fingered fastball. Like, when Mel Rojas was good, you could not hit him. He was an unhittable. But when John Wetland would come in, you would close your eyes and pray and sit and pray to the Lord that he was gonna not load the bases before striking out the side. You know?
I have gray hair now because of John Wetland.
Exactly. John Wetland was a roller coaster every time he came in, yet he was the closer, right?
It was such a relief when the inning would end and he'd finally get the 3rd out so I could actually breathe for a little bit.
And look, John Wetland was a good pitcher. He got better as he went along. I learned to live with him. We learned to rely on him. He was overpowering, at times, but he was an adventure, And Rojas, who was much better pitcher that year, didn't really get the saves. He got the holds.
Yeah.
The Skip and Josh podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. If you listen to the show through Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. To interact with the show, send an email to skipandjoshshow@gmail.com. Follow the show on Twitter @skipandjosh, and go to facebook.com/skipandjosh to like the show page. To see links mentioned on today's episode, go to skipandjosh.com. And now for some final thoughts from the guys.
Do you have anything you want to end with? I have lots. I can tell you what I've been watching on TV.
Well, I was going to tell you the same thing.
Well, let's hear it.
So you recommended a show on Netflix to me about a month ago called The Stranger.
Yeah, it's good.
So I started and finished it. It's very quick. I did like the show. I was a little disappointed with the last episode because
100%.
Because there's so many loose ends that they never tied up. They just ended the show.
They just ended, and everything is sort of neat and tidy, and you're like, okay, that's it, it's done. And you're like, what?
But like, what about the kid who was sick, who someone claimed that her mother was poisoning her? They never followed up with that in the end.
I know. I think there's going to be a season 2. I'm not sure.
Oh, I thought it was over. I didn't realize.
Well, I think they're going to reboot it with the same idea, like a secret that unravels someone, type of thing.
And then the other thing they didn't tie up. So the girl who was telling everyone all these secrets, turns out she's the daughter of the guy that was in the hospital. But they never finished up on that story either.
No, I know.
So like they left so much, just unresolved. It was just a little annoying to me.
So have you heard about, well, I haven't watched it. I might watch it tonight. Have you heard about the Justice League, the Snyder Cut? Have you heard about this?
I might have seen a commercial for this, maybe, but I'd have no idea what it's about.
So a few years ago, there was the movie The Justice League that came out, which stank.
Okay.
And if you follow what happened with the Justice League, they had one director, Zack Snyder, who was the director more or less all the way up to the end. But then right near the end of filming, they fired him. And they put together the movie and they released Justice League, which was completely not his vision of the movie. So now they are releasing what they're calling the Snyder Cut. And now get this, Josh. It's 4 hours long.
Oh my God. Who has that kind of attention span?
Well, I'll tell you who does. My son watched it group watch style with all his friends last night. They watched it all together. When I say together, separately, but together.
Right, right.
So they all watched it for 4 hours. From 8 to midnight, he watched the Snyder Cut. They took some breaks. And then I asked him, how was it? He goes, it's so good. It's so good. He goes, I'll watch it again with you tonight. I'm like, I don't know if I want to watch this 4 hour thing. I don't know if I mean, 4 hours? Are you like, I'm going to be sleeping after one.
I would need to do that in like at least 2 sittings. I couldn't do it in one.
Yeah. So I'll see how it goes. I'm going to let you know if I watch it tonight. And then the other show that I watched this week, Josh, it's completely not something you're ever going to want to watch, but this is for the listeners out there. It's one of the best shows I've watched this year, and that's WandaVision. Have you seen the commercials for this?
I've seen the commercials. It looks like something I'll never watch.
No, you'll never watch it. It's a Marvel show. It's part of the Marvel universe, superhero style and everything. It's on Disney Plus. But it's so different than anything else they've ever done that there's 9 episodes. And for the first 7, I was completely captivated. And then in 8 and 9, it becomes a regular superhero show. And I didn't care for that part. But the first parts where it's like, basically I can't even explain it to you, but she's in TV sitcoms, basically. Like they're recreations of TV sitcoms, and it has to do with the story. I can't explain it. I really can't. But she's in the Dick Van Dyke Show, and then she's in Bewitched, and then she's in the Brady Bunch, and Malcolm in the Middle, and Full House, and like it's they don't say the names of the shows, but if you ever watch them, you know that they are those shows, right?
Right.
And then of course in episode 7, as they get into more modern times, they're in this show where they're being interviewed in front of the camera, exactly like Modern Family, right?
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Right? So it's like anybody who likes to look back at like the nostalgia of the TV and everything, it's just, the show is extremely clever and just so well done. I just was in love with it. So I'm going to ask you, well, I think we're going to take a hiatus maybe next week, but let's just say, like, what are we doing next episode? Not necessarily next week.
Okay, so this is a lot of pressure for me.
Yeah.
But I'm going to my list.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was doing our list a few weeks ago with the 80s movies, I came across a bunch of movies that weren't in the 80s, and I wanted to include them. So now I'm going to include them because now we're going to do 90s movies.
Oh, great. Perfect. 90s movies is much harder. I think there's better movies in the 90s. I'm not sure, but
I think it will be harder because there'll be more to choose from.
Right.
For me, at least.
Right.
So it's going to be hard to get it down to 7.
Good category. I'm going to get my wife to give her a list.
Maybe she'll listen to another episode. Who knows?
We should be so lucky.
Right.
All right. Great talking to you. Great episode. Talk next time.
Have a great week.